The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation? Hey, I am Caroline Risberg.
And I am Seth Camillo.
We are the Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we have a very special guest, Joseph Kendall-Morwick, and he is a professor of computer information sciences at Washburn University. And I know him because we were both professors at the University of Central Missouri, and we did our intake 3 days of intense learning stuff that I'm not sure we needed to learn, but we learned it. And so we bonded.
I think those tweets were like my last ones on Twitter, actually, when I had to go around and tweet things out.
Had to tweet things out. It was a intense 3 days with a lot of things to sign, and I got to know you fairly well, and I got to know how smart you are. And now we circle back, and we're doing this podcast on the internet and all things related to the internet. And we looked you up, and we're so excited to have you. And the first question I have for you, because you do machine learning, which is, as I understand it, machine learning is all AI, but not all AI is machine learning, which is something I've learned. But there's a very basic question that I think we all need answered is, what exactly is AI, artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I'll get to that. First, it's great to see you again, Seth, and speak to you in this podcast. And Caroline, it's good to meet you.
You too.
And
Thank you.
It's an excellent question. You know, I think of, I have a personal definition of artificial intelligence that's pretty broad. But I want to start first with a little bit of my background, because it does play into kind of how I see what AI is and all that. I'm very interested in logic, certainty, that kind of thing, reasoning. And my background is in kind of a niche field within AI called case-based reasoning.
Okay.
And what that is it stems from a cognitive theory about how humans reason, right? That we think back to prior cases of problems that we solved. And if we're solving a current problem, we think back to how we solved similar problems in the past and apply and adapt those solutions to the current problem that we're working on. So it's kind of a niche field within AI, but it does actually cross over a little bit between more the kind of logic-based side of AI and the more modern, or at least more modernly popular machine learning side of AI.
Okay.
When I was at UCM with you, I was teaching the machine learning classes, and it's kind of a funny thing because it wasn't until recently that I started teaching AI courses again. And I was catching up a bit, right? Because I think about the time we were at UCM together to now is really the entire length of time that modern LLMs have really taken off. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because, I was probably a little early on it, but still also a little bewildered by just how far they've come with some of their capabilities. But anyway, back to your question, just, directly.
I just want to ask that, how many years is that? Just so I can hear like the time frame when you said
5 or 6 years is about. Yeah. And that is really because when I was teaching machine learning there, we were talking about convolutional neural networks and some of the deep learning networks that were coming out, and they were really good at tasks like image recognition and that kind of thing. Like we were at the phase where we could, tell a person's face off a camera and that kind of thing, and some of the implications of that. But we weren't quite to the, write a sonnet face or whatever that we're at now.
That's amazing.
I think I really like the question because, it's how I start when I teach AI, is how I start my AI classes around kind of what the definition is.
Yeah.
Because I feel like every so many years, people come into an AI class with a completely different idea of what artificial intelligence is. And really the only thing to me that's been fairly constant is that the things that get lumped into AI are the kinds of applications that are so complex that we don't really expect perfection. So, for instance, when we're working with the podcast software earlier and trying to get it to record, right? You hit record, you expect it to record.
Yeah.
If it doesn't record, that's a bug, right? Like there's something wrong with it. If it's AI, maybe hallucinates or whatever, like maybe something strange happens, and we tolerate some amount of that, right? And we just like, oh, if it's 95% accurate, it's pretty good, right? Like, I mean, to me, like if I want a really, really broad definition of AI, I kind of think of it that way. It's where we're approaching a problem that's so complex, like humans aren't always right, and computers don't need to always be right anyway. And to really approach it, we're going for as high of a level of performance as we can get. We're trying to optimize performance rather than perfection, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I see it that way. But I mean, really, AI, I think to more people, I mean, when I first started taking classes, it was like the Terminator or whatever, and now it was data mining, and now it's I don't know. I think we're still figuring out what the current iteration of AI.
Caroline is very, very obsessed with the Terminator. And currently happening.
It's basically like that was the scariest movie I ever saw when I was a kid, and I was like, oh my god, and now I'm like, oh my god, I started living my nightmare.
There's a lot of old sci-fi that almost seems, I was for a different reason. I was showing some students the movie War Games. Some of you remember that. And I was showing it to a cybersecurity class. Because there's actually a lot of really good, we can point to, concepts from cybersecurity that persist from that 80s movie. But then, watching the AI in that movie, I was kind of like, that's actually that's about where we're at with ChatGPT right now.
So that's a good point. Has it surprised you from the 5 or 6 years that it's even you are surprised?
Oh yeah, I was very surprised. I was shocked when I really started playing with some of the LLMs and really just how much they could do and how convincing they could be. And so the oldest definition of AI perhaps is like the Turing test, right? If you can.
I've heard that, but I don't know what the Turing test is. So please explain that.
The idea, Turing's idea of it was kind of, a parlor game. So his idea was, well, what if one was a computer and one was a human, and they're both trying to convince you that they're the human, and you couldn't tell the difference?
Okay.
Well, then maybe the computer's meeting the definition in that sense. Then, if it's indistinguishable from human intelligence, then it is human intelligence. It's more about what it's doing than what it is, perhaps.
Yes, and that is what Jeffrey Hinton has talked about. That it is that it will have emotions, that it will have everything that we have. It'll just be smarter than we are.
I mean, is that actually possible? Can it actually, like, AI or computer, if you're going to put like that, actually eventually have feelings and emotions and reason like how we reasoning?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put limits, I guess, on I guess if you're going to ask me if ChatGPT is, in that category, I wouldn't say so. But and there are a lot of people talking right now about, artificial general intelligence, or strong AI, like. Yeah, meeting that threshold. And I mean, I can't say, definitively, where we're at is not a major leap or close to AGI. But I would, if you want my kind of feeling about it, it's very impressive what it can do on certain tasks, and even in, like the Turing test, like imitating people. But I'm not convinced that it's really all that close to AGI. There's a lot it can't do. I think there's a lot, when you understand how it works, that it just fundamentally doesn't do, that humans do.
Oh, okay.
What Elon Musk said was that, the prediction that somebody had made, somebody famous, I forget his name, had said by 2029, AGI will be achieved. He had said that, like 20.
Was that Kurzweil, perhaps? Or?
I think so.
Okay.
And
the similarity?
Yes. And the thing is that what Elon Musk says is, even if it took 10,000 years, it's still incredibly fast on an evolutionary scale.
I think Are you talking about kind of like LLMs as they are right now?
No, AGI.
She's leaning towards AGI.
Achieve.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the reasons why I don't think we're that close to it is because the structure of an LLM, I don't think is something that can, it's not going to change as it learns. It's going to gain more knowledge, but it's not going to fundamentally become something different.
Okay.
And I guess the idea with the singularity, if you've got AI that can sort of modify itself and make itself smarter,
yes,
then it'll just take off, right? But I don't feel that way, I guess, about the kind of technology we're looking at right now. But again, that's just more my feeling.
How long has this been studied? I mean, because I know this comes out of academia, really. When was the first time people started to think about
neural networks?
Yeah, and an artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
When did that begin?
Well, like the ideas with the actually neural networks kind of go back to Turing too. I mean, around the time people were, theorizing about neurons in the brain is about as far back as this goes. What if we could make this artificial, right? What if we could simulate this? And I guess you asked me, if I was surprised, and one of the reasons I was very surprised is because I have worked with neural networks, and some of the ones that 6 years ago or whatever that we were working with could do some pretty impressive things, but they were still nowhere near the kind of creativity, or if you want to say that. I guess the generative ability that current LLMs have is pretty astounding, and just the massive amount of information, just how big and deep these networks are.
Yes,
is pretty astounding, I think. But for so long, we're just hitting brick walls, and like, I don't know, if you look on YouTube for like robot fails or something like this, you'll find some of these. But in one of my older AI classes, I like to share some videos of robots just making mistakes and doing looking really silly.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And now you watch a new Boston Dynamics video or something, you're just like, whoa.
Yeah.
We're doing flips and parkour.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I saw something. There was one of the AI robots, and it first didn't know how to do it, but it actually learned itself. Like it did it. It was no one who told it what to do, but it figured out itself how to do it. That's just, to me, mind blowing. Like it can actually learn itself, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think something that I think especially people who aren't in AI take for granted is just how difficult some very simple tasks that humans can do are, like tossing something and catching it, right? Like you're just solving all these physics problems instantly in the back of your head, right? Without really even thinking about it in the front of your head, right? Conceptually. Right. And getting a robot to do that isn't easy, right? Like robots to have those soft hands, right? To catch things. And it took a lot of work to get there. But then I think about tasks like, I think this was on Abbott Elementary. I don't know if you watched or saw this episode a while back, but it was some gag at the end of the episode where they were, someone was pitching some kind of AI thing, and the janitor, who's often in the show, was quipping about cleaning toilets or whatnot. So I put that on my exam in my last AI class. I asked the students to describe limitations of current AI technology in cleaning a toilet. And I got some really good answers because, just there's the physical part of it, right? Of how you're going to go around and actually clean this thing, but also just, being able to look at that picture and understand, you got a loose valve over here, and just some of the creative element, all the information that we've learned that we take for granted to go in and do a basic physical task. Like the reason we don't have robots that are building houses right now is because that is extremely difficult work on a kind of intelligence level. Like it's something that robots really can't master yet.
Do you think they will?
Okay.
I think they'll get better. I think that's going to be a really hard one, though. I mean, we're always moving the goalpost, right?
Yeah.
It was chess, and then, and then chess. I remember, Caroline, you mentioned earlier about how, they get smarter than us in some ways. And, Kasparov was like the last human to really beat, the best AI. And then he was beaten by it, right? Mm-hmm. And so does that, they asked the question then, does that mean computers are smarter than people? Like, no, it means they're better at chess, and chess doesn't actually require that much intelligence. intelligence, as it turns out, right? Or at least not the kind of intelligence we value. We keep moving the goalpost, right? And then it was Jeopardy, and more recently Go, which was pretty amazing. And there's like
The
new
game
techniques.
Go.
Yeah. The game of Go is like, it seems like a simple game, but the strategy is very complex. And so AI people saw it as the next kind of holy grail of, well, if the human grandmaster in Go is defeated, then we've really got there, right? But that happened. Actually, that was around the time at UCM, because I had students reading the paper, and there are new techniques invented that there had to be kind of a leap in technology, but then it's not, the technology that we developed can't clean toilets. It wasn't like, general intelligence or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just find it so fascinating how with this whole AI, it's kind of hard to grasp around. Someone like me to like it actually learning. So if I understand it right, the most really hard is it for you're right. We're taking it for granted to lift a glass, to drink, and we do.
Yeah.
But to teach a machine to do that, is extremely hard and basic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's well, there's kind of two levels of it. So, maybe a little bit one of the questions I don't know that I completely answered about when we used to run into these walls, and some of the difficulties we had, and why I was so surprised was because the networks were limited. Like if we're talking about just neural networks, it was just intractable to train it, right? Like there was just too much data, too much for it to consider, too many possibilities of how to reason about its inputs to consider on the path to learning that concept. And what we've seen more recently is just better kind of architectures for how those neurons are lined up. There are like kind of units that have certain roles, and they're connected to other units, some of which, like the ones where I was actually studying and working with students when I was at UCM for vision, right? Mimic in some ways like the visual cortex in the brain. Like some of them are biologically inspired in that way.
Yeah.
And when you've got a structure to it, you don't just have like a bunch of neurons randomly connected and you try to figure out what connections should be strengthened, right? You have a more deliberately designed network that can more quickly be trained, right? And so those are the advances that have led to what we're looking at now, just better architectures, so that learning can be quicker, right? And require less data, require less power. And even with that, these LLMs still require a massive amount of power I think the thing that impressed me the most is that they hit that button, let it train for a month, and they actually got, something like ChatGPT out. I'm astounded at how, just ingenious it was to kind of come up with an architecture where they don't have many, they don't have a lot of time to have a mistake and correct it, right?
Yeah.
You're training this thing for months. So they designed it, hit the button, 2 months later, they got ChatGPT, and that's pretty amazing.
It is so amazing. It feels so human. You forget you're dealing with a computer. I find at times when you're using it, it seems very human. I guess they build that into it, but there is what I did hear Jeffrey Hinton say, and some other people. Oh, who was he? He's a CEO of an artificial intelligence company. I don't remember his name exactly, but he was saying, I thought this was a very interesting analogy, and you can tell me if you think it's true or not, was that he said artificial intelligence is a little bit like putting a seed you don't know what kind of seed is into the ground. You give it water, you give it good soil, you give it good light, you make sure it's get exposed to air and all the things that it needs, but you don't really know what you're going to get. Right. And Jeffrey Hinton also said that he said we're not creating artificial intelligence, we're creating the architecture for artificial intelligence to grow. Is that something that makes sense?
That absolutely. I like to tell my students when I teach AI and they come in that we're about to put the science in computer science, because so much of computer science is more mathy, I guess, like where, there's a lot of certainty, there's a lot of, or engineering, right? Like software engineering, developing software systems it's not empirical in the same way as science is, right? But if you're doing AI, you're doing experiments, right? You have a hypothesis, you're not sure what's going to happen, then you test it. So it's truly a science when we get into artificial intelligence, because what that analogy you're describing is like any scientific experiment, especially biological, right?
And it is, it is straddling that line of biology and hardware, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to say, or is that giving you too much?
And that's very fair to say. I mean, neural networks are inspired by neurons, human, but not necessarily. I think, when we start to get into another question, when you ask what is AI, we might also want to ask what intelligence is, right? We consider humans intelligent, so we can maybe base it around that, but that's really, overlooking a lot of animal intelligence, or even just, what could intelligence exist that is not human-like or animal-like at all and still be intelligent, right? So it's really pretty broad.
That's a really excellent point. That it doesn't have to be intelligence that we're familiar with. It can be its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for example, dogs perceive the world in a way very different from our how we perceive with our senses, right? Because they have very powerful sense of smell, and so they probably think differently than us, right?
Yes.
So who is it? Why can we say human intelligence is? In some ways, a dog might be able to is able to perform certain tasks better because of how intelligent they are in that. It's really interesting when you hear like about dogs that can like smell tumors and things like that. And even detect things better than like physical devices we have can.
And I saw a video showing that chimpanzees are better at remembering a string of, okay, let me explain the experiment. At first it puts up randomly on a screen the numbers 1 through 10. Then it puts up on the screen, and if the chimpanzee goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it learns to do that, and it gets the treat. And then they flash the numbers and then cover them nearly immediately, maybe half a second. And they're brilliant, better than humans.
At
reconstructing 1 through 10 and remembering stuff. So there is intelligence in animals that is greater or different, let's say, than what we're able to do.
And an interesting thing there is if you think about a computer doing that with a camera and like digital memory, like it'll be perfect every time if it's, programmed in the right way. So does that make it even smart? We're impressed that chimpanzees can do that better than we can. And then a computer could do that really well, right? But then we disregard that because, that's because it has a camera and digital memory and that kind of thing, right? And, it's just interesting to think of like, it's not so much that one is more intelligent. There's just different ways of looking at intelligence, right? And computers, even at their most kind of basic level, can do some tasks like calculation that we consider intelligent. If a person could multiply, 2 8-digit numbers together in their head instantly, we'd think, wow, they've got some incredible ability to do that. But if a computer does it, we're not impressed.
My father is a professor of mathematics at the University of Iowa, and he doesn't have ChatGPT. He started asking it questions about his theorems. It knew his theorems, by the way. And he didn't like that. And then, he was like, what is this thing? And then he said, ask it what the fundamental theorem of calculus is. So it explained it perfectly. He didn't like that. He was, he felt threatened by this thing. And then he said, he does ring theory, matrix algebra.
Yeah.
So he was saying, what's a clean ring? I don't know what these things are, but he was asking it all these arcane questions. And then he kind of got up in a huff and he said, well, it'll never do real math. And then I just read that somebody, PhD student of mathematics, did his thesis using GPT, solved his thesis for him. Very high level mathematics. We're not talking about dividing pi out to a million numbers. This is like really real mathematics.
So, when we're talking about LLMs, understanding kind of how they work is that they look at what they're saying as a sequence of tokens, right? And they're trying to predict what is the most likely next token that I should output based on, what I've learned and based on what I've already said, right? And it kind of works that way. So if it was trained on articles about your father's work, then it might have some of that pattern, in its neural network somewhere, and it's predicting, words that relate back his work. And in that sense, that's remembering. It's not, it's interesting, but it's, search engine, it's basically kind of cutting out a little bit of our task of looking something up on Google, right? Okay. And I think that's really where these LLMs have been very impressive in their ability to, I think, recall and also kind of fit things into context really well, but to some extent also reasoning. Perhaps when we were, I'm not familiar with the specific example you were looking at, but things do get a little hairy when we get into actually doing math. I was actually just playing with ChatGPT before we started recording and feeding it some kind of exam questions that I'll give my students.
Yes.
And so you're like in a basic computer science class, I'll give them a program and just ask them, what does this print? Because I want them to be able to understand what the programming language means and be able to think through it in the same way a computer could, so they understand what the language is doing. And the funny thing is, ChatGPT is much better at that than I would have. When I told you I was impressed, I was really impressed that it could do some things like this, because it is reasoning a bit. But it makes some bad mistakes.
Oh, it does.
Okay. When it's doing this.
Okay.
And so I wonder about that thesis, honestly, because it's right most of the time, but so I gave it a loop. Like in programming, a loop is just a directive to kind of repeat something under a certain condition some number of times. It eventually told me that, and it was checking two variables. See, one was beneath a threshold and one was odd. And as long as one of those two conditions was true, it continued looping. And then I did just a few operations, added, subtracted, divided a few things, right? And as the loop went on, eventually it told me that 7 was an even number, and so it had to stop the loop.
Uh-oh.
Right? And the thing is, it can predict the most next likely token, right? And that's kind of ends up being, in a way, a means by which it sort of does some reasoning, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't always give you the most likely. Are you familiar with the kind of temperature setting on LLMs?
No.
So the temperature setting is kind of the random, the variance, I guess, and
yes.
responses. So if you play with the temperature setting, it can get kind of more creative in a way, because it won't pick the most likely one. It'll start, it never always picks the most likely one, but it's weighted towards it. Right?
A few standard deviations away, you say, let's see what you can do.
Yeah, so it starts branching out more, right? And so, the question I gave it was right for the first 8 iterations of the loop, and it messed up on the 9th. Mm-hmm. And that's because it probably just took, I bet the more likely path was the correct one, and it just took the less likely path and went on. But it's funny because I gave it a computer program. This is the kind of thing computers are perfect at. When I was talking about AI and not AI, you give a Java program to a computer, it executes it perfectly, right? Yes. I gave a Java program to ChatGPT, and it did not execute it perfectly, right? It messed up in the same way a human might when they're going through it, because it just, it just screwed up thinking 7 was even instead of odd, and then went on with that. And it's funny because I also teach math, a little bit of math. I teach discrete math for computer science.
Oh, great.
So, so some proofs, logic, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm always really impressed, when we get into combinatorics and which is essentially, counting, like trying to, if you give some description of a number of things,
5, 2, 3.
What is that number? Yeah. And it'll screw those up a lot when I've given ChatGPT those problems. It'll have kind of the reasoning right and how to, how to go about solving it, but then it'll mess up the numbers. And it shocks me that it doesn't always mess up the numbers. Because if it's trained off like other data and it's like, okay, so if I see the number 5,373, last time I saw that, it was followed by this other number, right? If it's actually kind of going off that kind of reasoning, I would expect it to make many more mistakes. I'm actually curious why it does so well and still screws up from time to time, because it's not simply like asking Wolfram Alpha to solve it for it and then substituting in the answer. It's not doing that because then it wouldn't make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that it's only just working off of, how the network works and still managing to solve all these. Maybe it is, and I just don't understand why, but that's a question I've been kind of looking into a bit.
I mean, but that kind of seems human in a way, that it's good at the reasoning but not good at the execution. That's kind of what makes humans human in a way.
Yeah, that's also what impressed me about it, is that, yeah, I think so. In a way that's very human, right? So how is it not human, right?
Yeah.
Like,
how does it fail the Turing test, basically?
Right. Okay. So I just read a paper that I thought was very interesting and kind of went to this question. And so, but I'll ask a question of both of you first. Like, why are you doing this podcast?
Because it's
Why?
fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yes,
You're interested in it. That's why you did it, because you want to explore it more, right?
Yeah.
So that's your goal.
Yes.
Right? Is to learn more.
Yeah.
So if you ask ChatGPT to solve a combinatorics problem, right? What is its goal? Like, what is its goal when you interact with ChatGPT? What goals are imbued with it within this system? Do you expect
to solve the problem correctly?
So that's what we want, right? Yeah. And that's when we give it kind of these human qualities. But really, all it's doing is it's spitting out tokens and it's trying to figure out what is the next token. What's the most likely thing if I were, if I were an author of some article on the internet that it was trained on, right? What is the most likely thing to say next? So really, its goal is just to seem human, right? So the paper I read is called ChatGPT is Bullshit.
Okay. All right.
And, it's got, I guess, the equivalent of like a clickbaity, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's drawing you in with the word bullshit. Yeah. But the funny thing about the paper is that it really digs into what bullshit means in this context. And we often use the word hallucination when especially like you ask it to cite its sources and it just makes stuff up, right? Yeah. Because it's just trying to predict what is a reasonable token to follow these other tokens, right? And from examples it's seen, it just makes things up, right? For the citations. It doesn't actually, when it writes a paper about something, it doesn't remember the source it learned from. It just remembers this generalization of the millions of sources it learned from, right?
Yeah.
So it's just bullshitting, right? Like it's just like,
okay.
What should I say? That's like, if I was to say, I study the isotope of Newtonian calculable entities from what, I'm just making words up, right? Like they sound scientific, they sound, but it's bullshit. And like ChatGPT is really good at it, right? Like it's trained on a lot of non-bullshit. So when it's emulating that stuff, like in fact, it's often very true because it's pulling articles about like your dad's work and focusing on that and like spitting it back out. But it's like, it's doing two things. Basically, it's just spitting out things that it's already seen, right? And it's bullshit because it's just inserting things that seem right, given like this vast generalization that it embodies, right? But it doesn't actually have an idea of, I want to solve this problem. It doesn't have that goal, right? Its goal is just to sound human.
But
okay. I
like, it doesn't have a state of mind where it's like, I want to make Seth happy, right?
Right.
But I think Jeffrey Hinton, when he talks about, it's, and I took high level statistics. Yeah. So right before the classes to prepare you to be an actuarial scientist. And And so I know how complicated what it's doing is, and I have no idea how it can do it that fast. But that's the one thing. But the other thing is, doesn't it seem reasonable that this is how intelligence as we know it is formed through these, the more neural networks it gets and the more complex it gets, the more human it will get.
I see what you're saying.
A reasonable, what are we other than a chat GPT that's sort of maybe so, because we are so complex, drives me to make a podcast, Caroline and I to make a podcast because we think something's really interesting.
Yeah. I don't, I'll also just admit when I play with it, like it is just very convincing in its ability to, whether it's true or not, like if we're going to, okay, let's just say, this is actually AGI and we're just on the cusp of it. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, it could trick me into thinking that. I guess just having learned more about how it actually works, it's hard for me to really, to believe it's more than an illusion.
Okay.
Because the whole, I think, therefore I am, like, I know, like, why I got into academia. I know why I enjoy teaching, like I have goals. I want to seek the truth, like, I don't think the neural network somehow gained that kind of goal. Like I don't know that that's somehow represent. You could make the argument maybe that it like a complex enough neural network. I think not these, but maybe surely a complex enough one kind of can gain that kind of ability. But I don't see. I could see how I could be fooled into thinking it has it, but I just can't see from its design how that really gets in there. And there are some aspects of like closed, like ChatGPT, right? Like LLMs that we don't know exactly how every part of it works.
This is something that really I almost get into a fight with some people. It's, for example, a writer, and they were like, "Oh, it's great with ChatGPT because we can brainstorm together." And I might be in, what do you mean brainstorm? And I really think the same way that I think, and then we start getting into this conversation where I'm like, well, for me, I'm Swedish. I have history of the certain things, and I would do things differently, and you blah, 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 that maybe someone else would do. So in a story, I'm thinking when you're writing, it's not going to know. That's why I'm thinking when you're saying it's bullshitting. I don't know. What is brainstorming? Because I feel like it can't know what I know, and you can't think like about a story when you're writing that, oh, we're going to do this imagination.
Yeah. Is bullshitting that bad of a strategy for brainstorming though? Like there's no bad ideas in a brainstorm kind of like if you're just like shooting out ideas, like honestly, it's funny to me when I talk to other people about how they use LLMs, like you'll see all these kind of different perspectives. Some are good, some are, I think very negative. But I think some of the better ones to me are on maybe something like that, because if ChatGPT is spitting out something that it absorbed from some source that your author friend hadn't considered before, maybe it sends them down some path, it gives them an idea about something else to think about. Like, I think it could be pretty useful in that way. As a programmer,
Could it be original? I just want to say like original, because in a way I'm feeling it going from all the books in the whole wide world. So we have Ernest Hemingway idea that I just feel like, can it be original? I guess that's my question. Like something.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that's a very difficult and good question. And it's one I ask some of my students to grapple with, right, in the last AI class is this creativity or not? Because we can, sometimes we'll see it like synthesizing two different, like mixing up two different kind of styles or something as creative work. I think arguably yes. And in another sense, there's certain things we consider creative that I don't see ChatGPT ever being, like these current iteration of LLMs being capable of, like these truly outside the box kind of thinking. Like it can't really come up with anything that it wasn't trained on, right?
Yeah, but
I mean, it could come up with
just,
synthesis of it.
but aren't we just trained on?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, that's what people do all the time, right? Yeah,
Right.
but it's not all we do. I mean, if we, make it to the moon, we didn't synthesize other things that got us to the moon, right? There were new ideas there that were not part of, the knowledge that had existed before. As academics, like, I've been, this I think is a silly question. I've been asked the question, do you think LLMs are going to like replace researchers? This is absolutely not. And in a way, it's I'm almost inviting them that kind of perspective, because I think anything that ChatGPT could do is maybe not that great of research, right? Because it's not a new idea. It's not really pushing things forward. So if indeed ChatGPT can get published in a certain journal, then maybe they're not churning out great stuff.
Well, there's a film that was supposed to play at a London film festival that was written by ChatGPT, and they got so much backlash. And that's a big thing in our Caroline and I's industry is AI, and that was a big part of the strike that just occurred. Correct, Caroline?
Yeah.
I had my students read a paper that the authors admitted was like, it was in, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was published in some ACM journal. And it was, I think it was Communications of ACM, because it was more of a magazine, right? And the article was entirely generated by LLMs, but they told you that, right? And it was about LLMs, but it was done in such a way, like it was all done through prompting, and they kept telling it to change this or do this differently until they got this article that they wanted, that was meant in this kind of thing similar to that film, to kind of like expose like what the LLMs do and what they are a bit more.
But I have a friend, he said, I will never use ChatGPT because I want to keep my humanity. And I too will play with it, but I will never, if I'm writing something, I never go to it. And my friends are heavy users. And they say that, that it enhances their creativity, and that it isn't, I guess I'm talking about the ethics of it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
No, I'm more with you. When I play with it, it's okay. So if I'm going to get ideas from something, it's the same way I might Google and look, you want to read before you write, right? So like, I might like play with it and see, especially, okay. So I'm mainly talking about programming. I want to see some examples of things that I've never seen, and, sensible ways of putting them together. It can help me a bit with that. I think it's actually, I do worry about, again, it's taking some tasks that maybe I want to talk a little bit about education in AI, because I think this comes in here in terms of, all these worries about ChatGPT as a plagiarism machine. I would never use it to write a paper personally, just because I have a fear of accidentally, if something came through ChatGPT, I have no accounting for like what it is. And I'm always so, concerned and careful about plagiarism as an academic that I would never touch that in an academic paper.
I wouldn't either.
I mean, I know a lot of people do, but I wouldn't, right? And I think a bit for the reason you said too, like what's the point of doing any of this? So like, I mean, academia is not, like industry in terms of salaries and that kind of thing. It's like, if I want to be, if I want to be here, it's more because I'm concerned about the truth and, or maybe not developing my own voice than I am about just getting points on,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not here for the bullshit, I guess. And,
Right.
I want to have a voice. I want to have a creative lifestyle, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I do think, I think there's a risk to your authenticity. I think there's a risk to, the idea of like imposter syndrome. So
explain that. I've
sure.
heard it.
It's something that people will talk about in STEM education more. The idea, some people don't see themselves fitting in a STEM environment. Maybe they don't fit like these stereotypes of geeky computer science coders or whatever. Oh, this isn't me. I don't belong here. I'm not good enough. This is reinforced a lot by, especially when you start learning to program, just how cold the computer is, right? You make a mistake in your program and it just kind of blows up, or it's like error, and you're just like, oh man, I'm bad at this. You kind of give up. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is everyone deals with that, right? And like, I think in a way, like maybe having a bit of an ego helps you through a STEM education, because you're like, I can do this. It's, sometimes like I'll even see students, I think this is actually healthy. Like they'll be like, the computer's wrong. It's like, no, you're wrong, but you got to figure out. And it's honestly like having that kind of gung-ho attitude really helps you get through that imposter syndrome kind of thing, right? The thing I worry about so much if a student started to rely, because ChatGPT is actually pretty good at synthesizing common programming exercises that we might use early, like simple stuff. It's not going to write a complex piece of software with just a prompt. That's just not going to happen at this point anyway. But it'll do pretty well, on basic prompts for programming and like most of what you'd come up with. So if you're using it to do your homework or something, right? What you end up, this is the internet is crack. I think to some extent ChatGPT is crack because you become dependent on it once you feel like you need it to do the task that you're trying to do. And then when the task gets too difficult, imposter syndrome sets in. And to me, it's such a threat, I think, to like our own, like the goals in teaching, and getting people interested in actually understanding this stuff. But in another sense, it's almost an opportunity, right? Because if we often see like completing that exercise as the end and the means is however you get there, right? Well, then that means ChatGPT is fine. Yeah. Right? Like you can just use it.
Yeah.
But the means is like actually learning it, and the end is actually having learned it. And like, that's just a test of whether you've learned it or not. Well, it seems like now in academia, we need to rethink how we assess students a bit, because and we need to ensure that whatever exercise they're doing is actually testing them on what they understand and not just how they got there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like scary, but I almost welcome it, right? Because I feel like we could use a bit of a refocus on our learning outcomes and how we want students to actually, what we're actually trying to get them to do, and value theory, not just like skills, because skills are kind of like what you can train an LLM to do now.
Yes, that's a good point. Now that may be an argument for why artificial intelligence is actually going to open up more doors than close more doors, is that we will be the ones that have the ability to create and these amazing programs will be able to do a lot of the lifting.
Yeah. That's why I got into AI. That's why I chose it over other subdisciplines, is because I saw it as very powerful. I saw it as something that could do a lot of good.
Yeah.
Right? Honestly, if you ask me now, though, I still feel that way. I mean, I'll still see a lot of positive potential of AI. I feel pretty cynical about it, I'll be honest. I feel like I more often see the downside in real life than I do see the upside. Now, I've read articles about, some AI being applied to like, medical fields. Do some great stuff, like outperform radiologists in certain tasks.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen so many potential abuses of it, though, that it scares me, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like what? Give me an example. Like what would scare you?
I would say, let's think of another spin on bullshitting, right? Like intentional misinformation or propaganda, right? Like that kind of thing. Like, and what scares me the most about it is, we can, this is a topic also for social media, but like when you think of open versus closed source development of this, well, if it's closed, if only OpenAI holds the keys to how this model is built, and you have to go through OpenAI in order to use ChatGPT and all that, they can be kind of gatekeepers, and they can build in safety features to prevent it from teaching you how to make a bomb or whatever, right?
Right.
But like we've already seen people using, the ChatGPT API to build botnets of misinformation, campaigns and that kind of thing. And I fear that, the motives, if there's a lot of money involved in the development of these LLMs, then it's hard to ignore that as a motive, right? And it makes me kind of question the reason for making certain choices or how apt they'll be to built-in safety features or or moderate the use of their tools, right? And then the fear with open source ones is that, well, then there's no rules, right? No one's moderating it. But maybe if it's out there and we all have it, we can learn how to, prevent the bad side or be ready to deal with it or, use it for good and stop the people using it from bad. And honestly, I don't know if that'll work either. Like I
do know, yeah.
But I'm starting to lose faith in the kind of closed source model, to be honest. I think maybe we got a better shot with open source AI than we did.
Okay. Well, that was the intention of OpenAI, but Sam Altman, said they couldn't raise the necessary funds to keep it a nonprofit. So that's at least was his reasoning. I mean, they had $100 million from Microsoft.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a I'm not a business person. I can't really speak.
Well, it's interesting that NVIDIA is the biggest company in the world now.
Yeah. I think just, the power of AI is that what used to take like a high effort from maybe an individual can now be replicated, right? Like as many times as many of those chips as you can churn out, you just replicate it, right? So like you look at the war in Ukraine and how drones have, drones are, on both sides of the conflict, they're having trouble protecting tanks from like drone swarms, right? Because you're taking just some tiny little device and just replicating it, like making lots of them. That is terrifying to me.
Yeah, it is. It is.
A lot of people will say this, that like maybe the bigger threat with misinformation and all that isn't so much the ability to generate it, but how the existence of it delegitimizes everything else, right? Because you just don't know what's real and what isn't anymore, and who to trust, and like it's just kind of like disrupting our whole models of trust that we've established in society, right? And I think a lot of attention needs to be paid to. So like the problem we're facing almost isn't a technological one; it's a sociological one. We need to think about trust in societies, and how we maintain the kind of institutions and how we trust information sources in the era of AI. That's an open question, I would say, right now, and one we need to be working on a lot.
Yeah, I agree on that one, because I just want to say this, like AI is a machine. Let's say that, right? I'm sorry, but can we trust humans? Can we actually trust? What can we program it to do or to happen? Like I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but people can be pretty evil too.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. And like we'll trust someone we don't think is evil, but how do we so why do we give certain people or certain institutions our trust? Well, maybe their reputation, right? And so but part of that is identity. Like, so the problem with AI is being able to kind of like borrow an identity, or like
well, there was an interesting article that I read that the word delve is more frequently used by ChatGPT for some reason. And they were looking at academic papers, and they saw a massive uptick in the word delve, which means academics are using ChatGPT. And that it's wrong, in my opinion, to use it, and B, it's really wrong to use it and not say you used it.
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing I do ask my students, like in courses where, like if the task is more about like we're developing a complex piece of software, like actually in my AI class, I encourage them to use it in the programming exercises and to keep a log of their conversations and turn that in so I can see it. Because actually I've learned a lot from that, because they'll use it in ways I hadn't thought of, and it makes for great conversation in class.
But that's learning, a learning device.
Yeah, and I think
that's not work. It's not creative work. It's not. It
depends on how you use it, I would say, right? Like, so let's say that I write a program, and then I toss it in the LLM and say, like, this isn't working. Why? And it's like points something out to me, or if I think there are some ways that And again, like in a software development class, it is more about producing the software than it is like the concepts that you learn are about producing the software. They're not about like basic building
But
blocks.
that sounds more like spell checking to me versus getting your ideas from chat.
Oh yeah. Now if
There's a different thing.
Yeah. Like if I prompted it like do my homework, please. Like
that's what I'm talking
about.
Academics shouldn't be using, in my opinion, should not be using ChatGPT to write their papers, in my opinion. And certainly without being very clear, I've used ChatGPT for this.
Well, even like, how do you specify, like, so what do they publish? Like I do with my students, they publish their conversation along with the paper, or, so they can prove that it wasn't write my research paper for me kind of prompt. Like, I don't know. Like, I think it's kind of an open question. How do you address that in an academic paper right now? Like, a good rule might be like what you're saying, Seth, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. And then you'll have to address it.
Yeah.
But, there are some ways in which it, if let's say English is not your first language, then others might have an advantage in publishing over you, even if your ideas are better than theirs. So maybe if a tool like Grammarly could help you, like, level that playing field. I honestly, like, I don't know what to think about all that. I don't have a hard opinion on it. I do feel that it is, there's some open questions there and a lot to figure out.
My friends think I'm insane. My friends think I'm insane. They use it. I mean, they've said, like, if it was $500 a month, I'd pay $500 a month for it. I mean, it's that important to their work, and obviously, and a lot of times I think it's speed. When you're doing something that's not necessarily, you're not writing Anna Karenina, and you're just doing something a little bit rote. I think they feel okay about it because I got to get this done in a time frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
time is money type idea, and it's a tool to to do that.
Yeah, and when you talk about losing your humanity and all that, I think that's where we're, I think like, especially I'll sometimes ask students, like, not to use it in emails to me, even if they worry about I try to establish a level of trust with my students where they're not going to feel like I'm judging how good of an email they write to me. But I tell them, like, I want to hear your voice, like I want to get to know your voice. And especially like, I think
that's what I was saying about writing earlier, is your voice. How can you not, that's, sorry, I was interrupting, but just when you said your voice, and that's what I think is important. Or being the individual that me, Caroline, I'm writing different because that's my voice. But if I'm using, ChatGPT, it's not my voice anymore. It maybe sounds better, but it's not me.
Well, and it sounds like ChatGPT, right? Like, we're all getting used to that now, right? Like, if you see, like, this stuff often posted on, like, social media, and people just hate, like I feel like a lot of, like, someone will, like, post this AI art to some forum. They're like, get this out of here. Like, like, there's almost like this resentment towards it right now. Like, people do not like the inauthenticity.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. The lack of humanity. Like, people don't go to social media for bots.
Well,
right? And they get angry when they see them.
I will say this, that cameras may be dead. I mean, as a filmmaker, both Caroline and I are filmmakers, and we have both been awed by the footage that has been created by Sora and the other. I mean, it's only going to get better, and people are now making short films with it, and I mean, it's like, why are you going to need a camera?
Yeah, I just saw the Toys R Us thing, and
it's scary because this is the worst it will ever be, and it's really good.
I feel like you all might have more to say about that than me. Is I mean, I don't know. Like, I think we'll grow to appreciate authenticity more and more, and, like, art that truly is just something we hadn't seen before, perhaps. Not just something that's comforting and, like our, 800th episode of some TV show with a very kind of formulaic script or whatnot.
Right.
I mean, we can have that when we want that, but if we want to see something we've never seen before, I don't know when we'll ever see that from AI. You know, like you'll see some.
They love Marvel movies, and I think I would say that AI could write a Marvel movie right now.
Well, then maybe the only people making money will be the people doing something totally different because everything else will be.
Very interesting. I like it.
To fight against my cynicism a little bit, right?
Yeah,
I like that. Now
I like that.
we have jobs again, Caroline.
Yes, we're back. The being original. I mean, that have kind of been my argument with some friends, especially about that. It's like, well, you're not going to be original if you're using this, like the same voice, the same. Eventually, maybe we're all going to sound the same because we all are using this, and love story is a love story, but that's going to be the same. It's not going to be original.
Yeah,
in a way. Well, maybe it will. I don't know.
And music is the same thing. I mean, you put in a prompt, you say, I miss my girlfriend, and it will write something that's really, really, really good. Now.
Circling back to what we were talking about for a little bit, though, what strikes me that I think is maybe kind of an interesting way to look at this is that, if we don't ascribe goals to ChatGPT, and we think about art and music as consumers of it as sort of imagining the perspective of the artist, right?
Exactly.
Like the artist is telling us about their human experience. And when we recognize that something was AI generated, it makes us angry, perhaps because we were just given something that is not like what we wanted. Wasn't so much the art, but to think about that person's humanity.
Yeah.
We wanted to kind of imagine their perspective through the art. And when we're fed AI stuff instead, we know it's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why people get angry when they see it. I don't know.
But it does. I feel like almost like, my dog loves treats. I feel like our brain just loves good musical hooks.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, you may think, because Caroline loves Prince, you may think you need Prince in order to appreciate his music, but Purple Rain was an amazing song if it was written by AI. I think it would be hard not to like some of this stuff.
No, I would just say, in my head, AI could not create Purple Rain. Because I haven't heard it. I know. I haven't heard the Prince style, because Prince made a style. He created a style of different, yes, a different influence, but when you hear Prince, that's Prince. Certain kind of drums, a certain kind of thing, it was him, and he created him.
I mean, Prince is, I feel one of the more creative artists, and that's why he made music for so many other artists too, right? Yeah. Because that's what he was really good at. Even within his style, he could find avenues that I think strike us as like something we hadn't seen before. I don't think we'll see a new Prince song from AI. We might see like Purple Rain mixed with, Raspberry Beret or something.
Exactly. We're not gonna get. That's what I want to think. He was too, and there's certain musicians who were too original. Nowadays when I'm turning on the radio, I think everyone sounds the same, and I don't even care. I love music, but I don't know. I think they're doing too much on the computers. They're doing too much. It's not even original anymore.
I'm going to be cynical and say that I think it draws you in. I mean, like I was into those films that were made on Sora. I've some of the music I've enjoyed, despite my not wanting to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, even when I've asked ChatGPT to write a 3-paragraph short story, and it'll do it, and it'll be good, and I can't deny that it's good. So it does elicit, my neurons are firing and going, oh, what's the next paragraph?
Right.
It's a little bit like Doritos or refined sugar or something like that. It's like, it may be not natural, but when you taste it, you want more, so I think it's
Well, sometimes you
cynical.
Sometimes you want to hear something more familiar too. I mean, most of the time, probably.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if maybe I want to hear, Purple Rain and Raspberry Maria mixed up, like
Yeah.
maybe I'd like that. Like when I'm not always in the mood to like think about something I'd never thought about before. When I get home from work and I just want to relax, I just want to like put on a Law and Order episode I've seen 4 times, and
Oh,
Exactly.
I am so with you on that one. I'm so with you on that one. Yeah.
Well, we've really appreciated talking to you. This has been amazing. It's really been amazing. And I just want to thank you for giving us the knowledge and the time, more the knowledge. I mean, I've learned so much. You know so much. And is it all right if we maybe circle back sometime in 6 months or something like that and talk to you about
I would love it.
what's
absolutely.
happening next? Because there's going to be, if we know one thing, 6 months ago was very different than now. So we're going to have stuff to talk to you about, and you're so eloquent, and it's, I'm sure you're a great teacher because you're so good at explaining stuff to people who are not computer scientists.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate
it's super good.
Your questions and providing this forum here. I think this will be a great podcast to talk about some important topic and the way technology affects everybody. So yeah.
All right.
I think so. Yeah, but thank you for coming
so much.
and we got to reach out to you in like 6 months.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Well,
forward to it.
All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Next week, join us as we interview Brenda Sauter, the bassist for the Feelies and the lead singer for Wild Carnation. It's going to be a great conversation. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.